By October 3, 1939, the invasion of Poland was effectively over. Both Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union had conquered the majority of Polish territory, with German forces controlling the western regions and Soviet forces occupying the eastern half. The remaining Polish military resistance was collapsing, and diplomatic actions around the world continued to reflect the profound global implications of the war's outbreak. Notably, the Panama Conference concluded on this day, marking a significant moment for the Western Hemisphere's response to the escalating conflict in Europe. Military events. Poland's last stand approaches. While most of Poland had fallen to the joint German-Soviet invasion, isolated areas of Polish resistance still held out. By October 3rd, these pockets were under immense pressure, with major battles, such as the Battle of Kock, which would last until October 6th, still ongoing. Polish forces, primarily made up of units retreating eastward, were severely outnumbered and faced overwhelming odds. On the diplomatic front, the fall of Poland was already being accepted as a foregone conclusion. Germany had shifted its focus to consolidating control over newly occupied territories, while Soviet forces continued their occupation of eastern Poland, capturing key towns and integrating the region into the Soviet Union. Diplomatic and geopolitical developments. The Panama Conference. On October 3, 1939, the Panama Conference concluded. This meeting, held in Panama City and attended by representatives of the countries in the Americas, resulted in the signing of the Panama Declaration. The conference, driven by concerns over the growing conflict in Europe, aimed to unify the policies of Latin American countries regarding neutrality and non-intervention. It also sought to establish a Pan-American security zone, creating a 300 nautical mile exclusion zone in the Atlantic to keep the war away from the Americas. The Panama Declaration represented a significant effort to shield the Western Hemisphere from the war while preserving neutrality. It included commitments to exclude belligerent submarines from ports, halt subversive activities by European governments, and cooperate economically to support peace in the region. The conference also reinforced Franklin D. Roosevelt's Good Neighbor policy, which sought to strengthen U.S. ties with Latin America while preventing the spread of fascist influence in the Americas. International reactions and media coverage. The end of the Panama Conference was widely covered in international media. In the United States, newspapers praised the agreement, with the New York Times highlighting the hemisphere's unified stance to maintain neutrality in the war. The establishment of the Pan-American Security Zone was seen as a proactive measure to prevent any direct involvement of the Americas in the European conflict. Meanwhile, in Europe, the reality of Poland's defeat dominated headlines. British and French newspapers continued to criticize their governments for the lack of decisive military intervention during the Polish invasion. In Britain, public opinion was growing increasingly critical of the so-called phony war, where despite declarations of war against Germany, there had been little military action on the Western Front. German and Soviet propaganda celebrated the rapid success of their campaigns in Poland. In Germany, state-controlled media emphasized the military prowess of the Wehrmacht, framing the occupation of Poland as part of a necessary reordering of Eastern Europe. Soviet media portrayed the Red Army as liberators of the oppressed peoples in Eastern Poland, justifying the Soviet Union's invasion under the guise of protecting ethnic minorities. Projections. The future of the war. The events of October 3, 1939, solidified the shifting geopolitical landscape. The fall of Poland was virtually complete, and the division of its territory between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union set the stage for future territorial ambitions. The Panama Declaration demonstrated that while the Western Hemisphere sought to remain neutral, the growing tension in Europe was having global consequences, forcing even distant countries to take precautions. Looking ahead, the defeat of Poland would free up German forces for future operations, with Hitler's ambitions soon turning westward. France and Britain, still preparing for an anticipated German offensive, would soon face the consequences of their inaction during the Polish campaign. Meanwhile, in the occupied territories, the brutal policies of both the Nazis and Soviets would begin to take effect, foreshadowing the atrocities that would define the war's darker chapters. The next stages of the war would see a broader escalation, as the conflict gradually expanded beyond Europe, pulling in more nations and leading to a confrontation that would eventually span the entire globe.